Now let's talk about t-tests, and we're going to start off comparing a z-test to a t-test. In a z-test, we compared a sample. We looked at the average of some sample, like maybe the average age or the average stress level of some sample, to the population mean, the average stress level in the population or the average age of the population. We also needed to know the population standard deviation in order to do a z-test to see if that sample was different than the population. But in real life, we hardly ever have the standard deviation of the population. We just don't do it. We have to estimate it based on the sample. In a t-test, we compare a sample mean to some other mean, such as the population, like we do in the z-test, or to another sample when we don't know the population standard deviation, which is almost always. So I'm a statistician who does a lot of statistics. It's pretty rare that I do a z-test. It's pretty common that I do a t-test. And in fact, in research, the t-test is the single most common test to use. So that's why it's really important to understand, even in an introductory statistics course. So this makes the t-test much more versatile. We don't need to know the population standard deviation. For example, suppose we want to know if there's a difference between two groups. Is the division led by Al, we can call that group A for Al, more or less stress than the division led by Bob, division B? We can get a sample from both groups and use a t-test to see if there's a significant level of difference in stress. Certainly there'll be some difference. They're not going to come out with exactly a stress level of 5.325 each. There's going to be a difference, but the t-test allows us to say, aha, there's really a difference in the two populations given the small samples that we have from each population. Now, the z-test is slightly different than the t-test because the probability distribution is different. Here we have the sampling distribution. The normal sample distribution is this blue one on top here, and the other ones are t-tests. And as the sample size goes down, the degrees of freedom we're going to see, with degrees of freedom 20, we get the black line, which is pretty similar, but the tails are a little thicker. And we go down further and further, and the tails get thicker and thicker as we go out, meaning that there's a higher percentage of the scores in those two tails. So the shape of the distribution depends on the sample size, the degrees of freedom that we have. So whenever we do a t-test, just like with correlation, we're going to be asking what are the degrees of freedom. Now, the first type of t-test that we're going to look at is the type that's described in Chapter 14. We're not going to look at the ones in Chapter 13 yet, because Chapter 14 is the broadest and the most common. So this is called a two-sample independent t-test because we have two samples. We're going to have Al's division and Bob's division, and people in Al's division don't influence people in Bob's division. So suppose that Al's division has higher turnover than Bob's division. You want to find out if people in Al's division are more stressed out than in people in Bob's division. Maybe that's why there's more turnover. So our hypothesis is that the stress of division A, that's Al's division, is higher than the stress of division B, Bob's division. So this is going to be a one-tailed hypothesis. We're just predicting that A is going to be higher than B. The null hypothesis is going to be the exact opposite. The stress of division A is the same or lower than the stress of division B. Ooh, spelled that wrong. Fixed that. All right. Now, here we've got the sample. I'm going to make it bigger so that we can see this. We have a data set here, and in the next video, we'll actually run this, but this gives you an overview. We have the stress data from the two divisions, the sample in the two columns here, and we're going to calculate the descriptive statistics for it. And we're going to see that in division A, the mean stress level is 13.75, and in division B, we've got 9.63. So the stress is higher, but is that significant, or is it just what we would expect? We're going to figure out how significant the difference is based on the standard deviations that we have and the sample sizes that we have. The way that we're going to do this is we're going to use the data analysis tool, the tTest, two samples assuming equal variances. So since we have two independent samples, people aren't related to each other, we're going to use that, and then we're going to report the results. And here is how and if we look at this, we're going to see that we've got the means of the two groups, and then we're going to have the degrees of freedom. We've got a t-statistic of 2.11, and we made a one-tailed hypothesis, so we're going to have a p of 0.03. So that means the results are going to be significant, and we can write it this way. The stress level of division A, mean equals 13.75, standard deviation equals 4.06, n equals 8, was hypothesized to be greater than the stress level of division B and give the same information for the sample in division B. This difference was significant, and then we report T with the number of degrees of freedom, 14, equals 2.14, and so that's the t-statistic, and then we also report the p equals 0.03 and have a one-tailed test that we performed.